opportunities aren't going to necessarily come knocking at the door. So to start having conversations with other people, and I can say, even for me, being an introvert person, having conversations and just reaching out to people has been the best thing I've ever done. Whether you take something away from that conversation or benefit.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you about was your video for Inspire Ed. So you mentioned that during those latter years of high school, you didn't really have a clear vision on what you wanted to do post high school. But one of the important things you noted was that you always knew you wanted to do something creative. So I wanted to start with that particular time period. For those people who may not know, you graduated from James Roos High School in 2016. And for those people who don't know, what was your experience like in those last 2 years of high school? Were you someone that was quite studious and excelled academically, or did your passions and interests lie outside the classroom?
So great question, Sid. So I think, in my latter years of high school and probably throughout my entire high school career, I was never really academically inclined. And that sort of led me to find my sources of energy from, through other means, whether that was through sport or through creating or building or strategizing in my own sort of spare time in whatever way I could do. But what I found, I guess, the difference between me and sort of a few other people, or my friends who sort of had a lot of clarity for what they wanted to do. And because they had that clarity of I want to become a lawyer, I want to become an investment banker, that sort of clarity I didn't have. But that clarity helped them in becoming academically focused because they had that goal. But I think that lack of clarity for me was what didn't make me academically inclined, if that makes sense. So I think instead of sort of focusing on that role or that job title of a lawyer or a doctor, what I did was I just tried to figure out what I like doing right now, or what I've always liked doing. And for me, that's been problem solving. It's communicating, it's presenting, it's strategizing, and just being creative, I think, with the way I solve my problems, I should say. And the last thing I knew I wanted to do was to work with people. So I knew I'm a very people person. So I think what I did was, instead of focusing on a specific, I want to become this and these are the things I want to achieve in the next 5 years, I was this is what I love doing now. So let me find a degree which is going to help me figure out what I wanted to do. I needed more time, in essence, to figure it out. And I think that's what the commerce degree really sort of allowed me to do. Because it was a 3-year degree, there was 16 majors to choose from, and I figured I would be able to figure out what I wanted to do somewhere in those 3 years. So yeah, I think it was that lack of clarity which drew me to make that decision to study commerce.
You mentioned something interesting there, and I think a lot of the people who I've previously interviewed have echoed similar sentiments. So you mentioned that a lot of people around you, particularly in high school, had things figured out. They had a particular role or position, lifestyle which they were working towards. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with that, but for someone like yourself who was still trying to figure things out as a 17, 18-year-old. Do you think that there is a little bit of pressure on other young people, or at least in your own experience? Do you think there's some pressure to have things figured out at such a young age?
Yeah, definitely, I do. As a 16, 17, 18-year-old, whatever you may be at that age, it's a lot of pressure to be this is what I think I could do for the rest of my life. And a lot of those degrees, whether it's a double degree or just those longer sort of degrees, it's 5-6 years of your life. And even then, some of those degrees don't even give you a taste of what it's like to actually be working in that field. So it is a lot of pressure to, sort of figure out what you want to do at uni and what you want to do for the rest of your life. And I think the biggest or the most scary part of that is that there are so many, there's so many unknown unknowns. And what I mean by that is that we don't even know what we don't know at that age. So to have to make such a big decision like that, to have that sort of clarity, not a lot of people do. There are people who do, and it's really good for them. But even then, you only really sort of get that clarity as you start working in the field and understanding those relationships and those conversations you need to be having in that sort of whatever field it may be. So yes, definitely a lot of pressure. And I don't think there's maybe enough tools to sort of figure out how to relieve that pressure and actually understand better yourself in order to make better
Mm.
decisions in your future.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it just there, like knowing yourself, and I think, you know, particularly when you are at such a young age, you're still you're still finding things about yourself, which are unknown, as you touched on. So I think that's a really important message for other young people out there to hear. One of the things I'm particularly curious about personally about your high school experience was, like we mentioned off air, that you attended, you know, one of the top selective schools in New South Wales in terms of academic success. So, I mean, I suppose from the outside looking in, I'm quite interested in, you know, what that was like, what that experience was like for someone who graduated from there. You know, from the outside looking in, obviously this is just an assumption. I assume it was quite a challenging and competitive environment for students. There was potentially a lot of pressure on students to succeed academically. Was that something that you experienced at your time at your school, or did you have a totally different experience?
Yeah, so I actually transferred to James Bruce in year 11. So I was there for the
Mhm.
last 2 years of my school. And you're right, it was challenging. It was very challenging. It was a step up for me, both academically as well as just fitting in, like, culturally in that school.
Mm,
But I think whilst there was a lot of pressure to succeed academically, the school definitely did have a lot of focus on those extracurricular activities. It
mm,
prides itself on all-rounders. And I think that's what I really liked about the school. Like, whilst I felt the academic pressure maybe wasn't the best for me, it was, it actually helped me sort of become more focused in figuring out what I wanted to do. And what I mean by that is because everyone was so driven and everyone is just so passionate, whether it's about academics or sport or whatever it may be. It was all about giving you 100% in whatever it was. So I think it was more that was my biggest takeaway. School like feels like forever since I've been, but that's the
mm.
one thing that I got from the students, from the staff. It was all, how can you give your 100% to this activity, academic or not? Which I've
Yeah.
sort of taken from that. Yeah.
Do you think there's something to being surrounded by like-minded, ambitious, and driven people? Did that sort of inspire you when you were at high school?
Yes, definitely. The friends I made, I think that's why they became sort of friends, is because we're all passionate, we're all driven, not necessarily
Mm,
by the same things, but it's that energy around you. And if you can surround yourself with energy that motivates you, I think that's what drove me. And I think that's
yeah.
what still drives me in the environment that I'm in now.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that in your Inspire Ed video as well, in a different professional capacity, which we'll get to later down the line as well. So, I mean, just to end off and cap off that high school experience, for someone out there like yourself previously, you know, who didn't have a lot of clarity, or who didn't really have an idea about where they saw themselves progressing professionally, what sort of tips or guidance would you give that person?
Yeah, I think it's the guidance we hear all too often, but it
Mm,
really is to follow your heart and do, what seems best for you at that moment. It's not what could be good for you in 5 years time or 10 years time, because you don't know what's going to be good for you in 5 years time. You don't even know what's going to happen in 5 years time. So, all those things about stability and sort of that list we create in our head of what the ideal profession is, I
mm,
think it's very easy to latch onto them, but it's probably not a very good habit, especially early on, because if they become your sources of job satisfaction, you're never going to be happy in whatever career you sort of make of yourself, right? It's the energy we all draw from our everyday work that makes us happy. We spend,
mm.
37, 40 hours working a week. So if we can actually find something that um, allows us to generate as much energy as we can for ourselves, like that's what we should do, not things like stability or money. So, obviously going back to your question, it would really be to just figure out those few things which you're like, these are the 3 things or 4 things which I must have over the next couple of years or that I want to achieve. So for me, that was one, figuring out what I wanted to do. It was interacting with as many people as I could, and sort of branching out and meeting different kinds of people. And I figured by having enough different kinds of conversations, I would be able to sort of along the way figure out what I wanted to do by learning what people are enjoying, what they're not enjoying, what's worked well for people, and having these kinds of conversations with people who are actually working to to sort of figure it out. So I think my advice would sort of be have those conversations and start asking yourself like what it is that gives you energy each day. Like why do you get out of bed each day?
Yeah, I think an important point you made there was looking towards yourself to figure out, what your purpose and passion is. And although it's not an expectation that you should, find that answer definitively, particularly when you're that young. Asking those questions is, definitely something that will put you on the right path potentially. So, graduating from high school and transitioning towards university, you ultimately you actually mentioned off air that you started studying a different degree. Is that right?
Yes, so I started studying a Bachelor of Commerce and a Bachelor of Information Systems.
Right. Okay. Okay. And so right now you graduated just recently. So prior to actually experiencing firsthand what uni was like, was there any sort of reservations, doubts, or concerns you had entering that Bachelor of Commerce degree?
Yeah, I think um, it was actually what was the most scary thing for me was the plethora of opportunities. There was just too much to choose from. And
Mm,
maybe I didn't feel like I had enough guidance in terms of what I could choose. So, at UNSW, at least in the Bachelor of Commerce degree, there was 14, 15 majors to choose from. And in your first year, I think we got to trial like four of them as a
mm,
compulsory course. But everyone around me was majoring in like accounting and finance, and those were the sort of main two that people were majoring in. And I wasn't the biggest fan of numbers. So I think I was super confused. I was like, are these the majors I need to do to get a job? So that instant pressure when you get into uni of people finding internships and like, how is this course or this degree going to translate into a job in the future was really daunting, I think. So that was
mm,
probably one of the biggest reservations I had. It was like, am I making the right decisions? Like constantly doubting myself in terms of that.
mm.
Um, so yeah, I think I would say that would be the biggest reservation. I think the second was like, am I going to fit in? Am I going to make friends? Am I going to meet the right people who are going to help me make those decisions? And yeah, and I think we'll get to this, but I think the society sort of helped me with that in terms of guiding those decision making
Yeah.
processes for me.
Definitely. I think you reflect a lot of concerns and reservations that a lot of other young people have there, and that's one of the things that I'm trying to illustrate with these conversations is trying to reflect a more accurate and realistic depiction of someone's particular professional pathway. So, as I mentioned in a previous conversation, it's quite refreshing to hear those honest and transparent like opinions and perspectives. So you mentioned there that alongside your university degree, you also were involved in a society, which the main one you were involved in was the Business and Information Systems Society at UNSW. One of the things we mentioned and touched on just before was, surrounding yourself with like-minded people with similar interests and passions, which is something you also echoed in that Inspire Ed video. So as I mentioned previously, you've represented that society in different roles, most recently being the Vice President of Operations. So I suppose my first question was, how did you get involved with that society and what motivated you to join that particular society?
Yeah, so I think my biggest motivation was actually to find friends because I didn't actually know anyone who was doing the same degree as me at the
Mm,
time. So it was really just, I'd heard of these things called societies and, the equivalent to sort of clubs at schools. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to go to the orientation event or the opening event for the year and just see how it goes. And I met a whole bunch of students just like me who were just there to figure out what on earth was happening and sort of meet other people who were maybe as lost as them. And that's how I got started. And then I sort of got to know about the size of the society and sort of the kinds of initiatives that they are involved in, and they're very large societies. Some of them have student bodies of up to 50 students. So I realized these societies and these events and the initiatives that they come up with are sort of being driven by student bodies. which I didn't know. I didn't even know that before. Like I thought they were actually uni led and not student led. So that was really sort of cool. And I thought, why don't I get involved in this? Like, I'll not only be able to sort of meet people and get close to people, I'll probably learn a few things through their different initiatives. And I think it was a chance for me to sort of step out of my bubble and take initiative or leadership in some sort of aspect, which I was sort of shy to do before in my high school career. So so I did that, and I initially just joined the subcommittee, which is basically just I wouldn't say the lowest level, but it's basically just
Entry
one of the
level.
one of the teams within the society. So I was in the social team, which meant that we were responsible for coming up with all the social events for our external student bodies and like the internal society. And yeah, through that experience, and over a couple of years, I basically moved up to a social director and then a vice president. Met heaps of people, made a lot of friends. I think one of the coolest things about it is a lot of companies sponsor those societies, like one of them being Microsoft, and then we had CPA and a few other banks and some of the big four accounting firms as well. And because you become responsible and accountable for those relationships that you have with these companies, I think it's that level of accountability and relationship building you sort of accelerate those skills in a really short amount of time. So I think it was a lot of interpersonal skills actually that I learned from that society exercise, in addition to making friends. That was really cool for me.
One of the things you mentioned off air was, I suppose, the limitations and value of your degree, and just hearing about some of the experiences and opportunities that came to you by involving yourself in that society, I suppose reflect those sentiments that there's only so much that your degree can offer you. So I was wondering if you could just expand on that thought you had earlier about realizing what the actual value of your degree actually gave you in your experience, and what those
Yeah.
limitations were.
Yeah. So like, going back to the reservations question, you talked, I talked about how one of them was not knowing like whether you're making the right decisions. And I would say like another one, which a lot of people have, is like, how well do I need to be doing at uni to even be considered for an internship or a job? So when it comes to limitations of your degree, I think it totally depends on what kind of person you are. If you are academically inclined and you're getting high distinctions in every subject, is that your source of energy? Is that sort of what you love doing? Do you love theory, and do you love, like, I don't know, excelling at your university degree? For me, it was more so I've never been academically inclined, like I said. I think I wanted to always, I always was just like curious. So what I mean by that is sort of, I wanted to, like, I was always asking why, like, why are we learning this theory? Or like, what's the importance of this? And what that really came down to was like, how is this applicable in the workplace? Um, so I think for me, the biggest limitation of my degree was I felt like I went into the workplace in these different internships, and I was very much sort of learning a lot of skills from scratch. Yes, the fundamental, the basics that we learn at uni and the interpersonal skills that you come up with really help. But I think at a more applicable level or a real life sense, those relationships, negotiation skills, some of those skills are just things you can only learn on the job. So the way I have viewed my uni degree, and which is completely fine, it could be different to someone else's, has been more of a way to just learn the fundamentals, learn the basics. It's been a way to, through my group assignments and through society work, to meet as many people as possible, learn from as many people as possible. And I think just benefit as much as I can by improving my interpersonal skills. So becoming really good at presenting, doing reports, things like that.
Yeah, you mentioned an interesting point there about being curious, and again, that takes me back to what you mentioned in the Inspire Ed video. So one of your tips, I think it was the second or third one, was about being open-minded and curious. Is that something that you, based on your experience at university, that you'd encourage other young people who might be graduating high school and entering university to adopt?
Yeah, yes, definitely. I think if you're not asking questions, you're not really learning anything. So I think not only asking yourself questions, those important questions, but asking other people what's worked for them, listening to their experiences, and having those conversations will allow you to learn more, and therefore make decisions that you need to make for yourself.
Yeah, definitely. So alongside your university degree, you also emphasize the importance of undertaking work experience wherever you can. So as I mentioned earlier, you've completed 3 internships across your university degree, most recently in marketing and sales at Microsoft, which I wanted to explore in a bit more detail now. For me personally, from the outside looking in, I imagine it may have been quite daunting to, start a potential career at Microsoft, which is obviously quite a big, huge, multi-billion-dollar multinational technology company. Did you echo some like similar sentiments? Did you have any reservations going into working for such a big corporation?
Yeah, definitely. I think probably a month before I even applied to Microsoft, I don't think I even ever considered it as a company I would
Mm,
apply to or that I could work for. I always sort of, I think we sort of build these assumptions in our head of like what a company is and like what
mm,
kind of person you have to be to work at a company. So my perception was you need to be extremely technical to work at a company like Microsoft. And, it was always just this computer software company, and like I never really
mm,
considered it because I found that at least through my experiences the internship focus of students was always on the big four accounting firms or the banks, so I never really considered the tech firms, especially because I wasn't a technical student myself. So yes, it was very daunting even applying, and what helped me in those like making those decisions, or even like considering applying, was just talking to people who had been working or interning there before me.
So is that how you came across the opportunity, just by talking to people who had experienced similar internships?
Yes. So at the time, I was vice president at for BITSA, which was the Information Systems Society, which I was a part of, and Microsoft was actually a sponsor for that society.
Right.
So we dealt with them in terms of events that we came up with and initiatives as such. And a few of the students in the society as well had interned at Microsoft or had friends who had interned at Microsoft. So I was able to actually speak to, the HR or the university recruiting team through those initiatives.
Mhm.
So I think that's probably one way to get involved or just learn more by going to those events that societies hold.
Mm.
But yeah, also having conversations with people, who have been involved in that company before.
So obviously it's well documented now your passion for helping others, particularly young aspiring women in STEM related fields and technology. Was that something you developed at Microsoft, at your time at Microsoft, or was that something you've always had through high school, university, or whatever the case may be?
I think I've always had that passion purely because I found my love for technology a bit late. And I
Mhm.
think a lot more students would have that love for technology if they were exposed to it at a younger sort of stage. So I would say that, being a very lost year 12 student has sort of, over the years, as I figured out what I want to do, has made me more so want to help other students who could be in that same position.
Yeah.
So I would say, student societies or any organization that you work for, like whether it's Microsoft or whatever it may be, they sort of serve as a platform for you to exercise your passion and really showcase your passion through initiatives. But
Mhm.
it's not necessary that you need those organizations to showcase your passion. It could just be a
Mhm.
matter of you coming up with an initiative of your own, just like you have with this podcast. It could be anything like that. But yeah, I would say it's a passion I've always had, but sort of found different platforms and means to showcase and deliver on that passion.
Speaking of Microsoft being a platform for you to showcase your talent and passions, one of the opportunities that came across to you at your time at Microsoft was the Codex Experience, which I mentioned you co-led. I was reading an article you co-authored, which talked about that experience. So it aims to inspire young female students and empower them to pursue their professional goals in STEM-related fields. So in 2020, I was reading you co-led that experience, which was a 5-day project for 80 tertiary students. Is that right?
Yes.
which aim to foster a collective passion and potential career in technology for young females. One of the questions that I had for you is that in that 5-day experience, what were some of the key messages you were trying to get across to aspiring young females who are pursuing a career in tech and STEM related fields?
Yeah, so I think when I started sort of planning Codex with my co-lead, we
Yeah.
very much talked about the uncertainty that there has been, especially this year because of COVID-19, in terms of jobs and internships and what does the future look like with students. And just these were just concerns we'd heard from friends at university. So that was sort of where we drew all of our ideas and initiatives from for Codex.
Mhm.
It was sort of targeting that uncertainty. So some of the initiatives that we led were mentoring sessions on how to network in a virtual setting. We had conversations about how to tell your own story, which is, all about being vulnerable and just showcasing who you really are beyond sort of a surface level, very professional way. So I would say the key messages that sort of came out of Codex this year was to be your most vulnerable and authentic self that you can be, because that's the only way that you, one, learn about yourself and the way other people learn about you. Two is to go and seek those opportunities yourself. Opportunities aren't going to necessarily come knocking at the door. So to start having conversations with other people, and, I can say even for me, being an introvert person, having conversations and just reaching out to people has been the best thing I've ever done. Whether you take something away from that conversation or benefit as such, doesn't matter. You are going to learn something from basically anyone. And I would say the third thing that came out of Codex was we sort of tend to put limitations and restrictions on ourselves very early on. Even, like at the example I gave before was I didn't even know Microsoft was a company I could work out. So if we stop putting those restrictions and limitations, which don't even exist, and we just, do that to ourselves, if we stop doing those kinds of things, we'll see a lot more opportunities flow, and we will sort of become more open-minded to different opportunities and initiatives that could help us learn about ourselves and learn about or figure out what we want to do eventually.
I think those are some really great insights that not a lot of people, are particularly aware of. One of the things you mentioned, and which you wanted to talk about as well, was not being vulnerable enough, and I suppose putting like constructing arbitrary or artificial like limitations upon yourself. So I was wondering if you could, explore that idea of not being vulnerable enough, and putting on, perhaps different personas or masks when we go into different professional contexts. I was wondering if you could explain that idea in a bit more detail.
Yeah, so I think one of the struggles that I had entering the professional workforce,
Mhm.
probably when I was in first year uni, was this perception that we're a different person in the corporate world. We're meant to be super
Mm.
professional, and we don't have to talk too much about our personal life. And to some degree, that is true, depending on who you're talking to in the workplace. But I would say that the most genuine relationships and the best relationships that I have built across different managers and colleagues in the workplace over the last couple of years have been those relations where I've felt comfortable enough to become vulnerable and to sort of talk about genuine things. And what I mean by that is not only owning up to mistakes and whatnot in the workplace, but it's sort of realizing that all of us are human, and we're allowed to be, as funny as we want to be. We're allowed to be sarcastic. We're allowed to be sort
Mm.
of as authentic as possible in the workplace. Like, why is it that we are a different person with our friends as we are with our colleagues? Why can't we sort of be more open in making genuine relationships in the workplace? Because I
Mm.
feel that there's that genuinity that exists in those relationships reflects in the work that you deliver on as well. So I think it's very important to be vulnerable. Um, all the times I've been vulnerable have really helped me in understanding sort of my situations better, have been
Mhm.
understanding myself better, and sort of just provides me more perspectives as well on what I could be doing better.
One of the things I wanted to touch on on the back of that Codex experience was interesting testimonial, which was on the article that I read, which was from Evelyn. What she said was, my key takeaway from Codex is that our career opportunities are limitless, and what matters most is our attitude towards learning and growth. So, I mean, quite a broad general question, but how do you approach learning and growth and different setbacks? And do you think that's changed based on the experiences that you've had over time?
Yeah, I think definitely has changed. I would
Mhm.
say what I used to define as learning and growth was very much going to uni, you know, learning my course content, sitting those exams. And how I view learning and growth now is more if there is something that I want to do and achieve, and I don't have those skills right now, or I don't have what it takes to do that role, like what can I be doing? Or what all can I be doing to achieve that? And I think that sort of learning is sourced from a lot of different sort of places. So the way I view learning is definitely you need to be vulnerable, you need to be very honest with yourself, and you need to have sort of a really expansive growth mindset. So what I mean by that is like this year, for example, I was in a very sales and marketing oriented role, but I decided that I want to move into sort of a more technical role because I see that there's a lot of scope in the cloud business for me to be helping customers at Microsoft, but I didn't have the skills. So it's not, I'm going to go and find a sales and marketing role. It's, you know, what can I be doing between now and me starting that role to ramp myself up for that role? So it's not just, you know, doing theoretical sort of courses and undertaking certifications, which are really important. They really reflect the time and effort you put in, but then also having conversations with people to sort of consolidate your learning. But I think the most important thing when it comes to learning and growth is developing an opinion on everything that you learn about. And what I mean by that is, you know, if someone asks you, like, what do you see as the top 5 cloud opportunities in the next year? Actually having an opinion on those opportunities. Because as soon as you have an opinion, that's what makes you sort of different to the next person they're speaking to in the business. And if you're able to
Yeah.
bring your opinion to the table, that's what makes you influential. So I would say learning is becoming influential yourself by influencing yourself from different sources.
So you mentioned there about the importance of expressing opinions on matters that you come across. Do you also see value in being able to adapt those opinions in response to new experiences that you have and to new information that you receive?
Yeah, I think definitely if you don't have that sort of seeking nature and if you're
Mhm.
not willing to be open-minded when it comes to conversations with different people, then that's where your learning and growth really stops. Unless you're going into conversations and meetings and with that sort of, you know, seeking mind and willingness to learn and grab sort of as many perspectives as possible, there's no way you can sort of learn. But if you are willing to do
Mm.
that, that's where you sort of your learning abilities really accelerate, and that's where the way you think and the way you strategize and problem solve really sort of changes, and it becomes really good, I guess, because you're
Mm.
able to sort of grab perspectives or think about a particular problem or issue from so many different angles because of those conversations you've had. And I think that those are the opinions and perspectives that if you that will sort of differentiate you from the next person.
I think for me personally, one of the central messages that I've sort of recognized through our conversation so far is, you know, your opinion on being your most authentic and true self. And I suppose, you know, it's a lot easier to be yourself in different contexts rather than trying to be like a secondhand rate of somebody else or someone you sort of someone you construct in a particular context. So, I mean, part of being yourself and being authentic is pursuing your own passions and interests and hobbies. And one of the things that you've been doing for the past year or so, how long has your Instagram food blog been actually been operating?
I think it's about 2 years now.
About 2 years. So
Yeah.
alongside your university degree and interests in technology and empowerment through STEM, one of your passions and hobbies is food. And for those people who are listening who don't know, you currently operate a food blog, which, you know, whilst displaying your hobby for food also helps to empower local businesses by increasing their social media presence. So firstly, can you tell us a bit about that food blog and where the inspiration came from to start that food blog? And
Yeah.
am I correct in saying that you started it with a friend? Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
with one of my high school friends.
Mhm.
After we both graduated from high school, she went to Brisbane to study, and I was in Sydney. And this blog sort of started out of nowhere. We just both love eating out. We love trying new foods, and we both were always those annoying people at the table taking photos of the food, letting it get cold. So it really started out of nowhere, and it didn't mean to grow into a big blog or anything like that. It was just something for a few of our friends to follow and just, get some ideas or recommendations for places to eat in those two
Mm.
cities. And yeah, so it has grown quite substantially over the last year and a half, to about 5,000 followers.
Wow.
But I would say along the way, we met all sorts of people. We worked with sort of really large businesses and also small local businesses. And the best part has just been meeting people and just talking to them about, their perspectives on whatever it may be, like whether it's the way small businesses operate in Australia, or their how they struggle through COVID-19, and sort of what foodies like ourselves could contribute to or help them through those struggles.
Mm.
But yeah, it's been a really great experience.
Another interesting tip you had in your Inspire Ed video was tip number 3, which stated that you shouldn't give up on your hobbies because when we do things we love, we feel stimulated and motivated. So my question to you is that, do you think, in your experience, do you think it's easier to start a project which actually reflects your genuine and organic passions and interests? Was there something self-motivating about it? Did you start to realize that like it's not a chore you have to do, it's something you genuinely enjoy and have a passion for?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think when you love something, it never feels like a chore, right? And I think it's very easy for people to say, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. But that doesn't necessarily mean we have to source all of our 100% daily energy from just our corporate, like, jobs. We all have passions, we all have hobbies and interests that lie outside the workplace. So I think holding on to them is really important, because not only do we need change in our life to make it stimulating every single day and dynamic, we do need those different sources of energy. So yeah, I think for me it was a bit of a mix of food and photography, and now it's become also meeting people through this
Mm,
experience, which I gain a source of energy from. So yeah, definitely do things you love,
yeah,
and it's always much easier to sort of kick off passion projects that way.
yeah. I mean, one of the great things that arises with the conversations that we're having is that we get to meet, really ambitious people like yourself who are starting their own passion projects and who are expressing themselves and expressing their ideas. And one of the things that I want to try and reflect with these conversations is the process of actually starting a particular passion project. I mean, for me personally, when I think of starting a project, I think of these huge barriers to entry, whether it be, not having enough time, not having enough money, not having the right skills, experiences, not having 10 million followers on a platform. So in your
Mm.
experience, what was it actually like in those initial stages to launch the food blog? Was it as simple as, taking a camera to a cafe and take a few photos? What was that process like at the initial stages?
Yeah, so I think when we started it, it was very much like, let's just go for it. This is what we've already been doing this, but on our personal Instagram account. So let's just put something together that's a bit more curated, for people out there who are looking for recommendations. So we didn't even know what sort of opportunities were available beyond that. So it was just, out of our own pocket, we were going with our camera or our phone and taking pictures. So along the way, somewhere, we started getting invitations from different cafes and brands to do some content creation for them, to take photos for their website or for their own Instagram. And I think that sort of was the turning point for us. It was, do we want to harness these opportunities? Will it really reflect our authentic recommendations on the blog, or whatever it may be? So I think it was at that point where we had to start like asking ourselves, are these with each collaboration that we were sort of offered, would it be reflecting our own sort of authentic opinions? How would we go about dealing with that? So I think my biggest sort of takeaway was just, whilst you are doing, something for yourself, and, for some people, passion projects could also be earning some money out of it. I think it's really important to stick to what you believe in. And if the point of your blog or whatever your passion project is to reflect authentic opinions, and be as real as possible, I think that's what you just got to do. Because in the end, if you don't do that, then it will start feeling like a chore, because it won't be something that you necessarily love anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a really great insight. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was, a particular challenge or obstacle that you encountered when you started that passion project. Was there like a particular challenge which troubled you guys at the initial stages, and how did you overcome that challenge?
I think the biggest challenge for us was creating content, or making sure that content was actually attracting followers. I think at the beginning, you become really ambitious sometimes, and we really
Yeah.
wanted to become big, and we wanted to attract lots of people to our page. But I think what helps us was just, again, being as organic and authentic as possible, and just reminding ourselves that if we're going to create good content that we believe in, then it's organically going to attract people who believe in our content too. Because I think that's ultimately what draws people to different pages or websites, is just other people with similar interests. So I think, again, remaining authentic and organic, and reminding yourself like that this is why you're here and this is why you're doing this thing, really helped us with overcoming that challenge. It was more of a mental challenge than anything else.
So in closing, Muskan, I wanted to discuss just one final thing in that Inspire Ed video. I might have mentioned it like 10,000 times in this episode, so I do apologize for that. So you talked about something really interesting. You talked about a desire to make a real and purposeful impact. Like for me personally, like I like to think of myself as an optimist. I like to think that people, particularly young people, have an intention and a desire to affect positive change in the community, or real and purposeful impact in the community, to put it in your words. But I suppose like a challenge they face potentially is the how are they going to make that impact? So in closing, is there any final piece of advice you'd give to someone out there who has an intention to make a real and purposeful impact, but just isn't sure how they're going to affect that in their community?
I think firstly, sort of relieving yourself of that pressure of figuring out your purpose really early on. I don't think anyone necessarily does. And I think there is a lot of pressure to sort of figure out what it is that you want to achieve and what you want to do, and like what's your purpose. So I think that would be my number one advice, is relieving yourself of that pressure. The second thing would be, just going and exploring as many opportunities as you can. For me, each person that I spoke to, or each experience that I took part in, I've learned something from it. I've learned something about that experience and that person, but also more things about myself. And the better you get to know yourself, and the more sort of authentic you become in every single interaction that you have with people around you, the better you're going to get at figuring out your purpose. And I would say the third thing, which I probably started doing only very recently, is getting out a piece of paper from time to time and writing down what are those 4 or 5 things that motivate you or give you energy. And that'll sort of help with direction. So I think those are my top sort of 3 tips.
Awesome. With that being said, Muskan, that pretty much brings us to the end of our interview. I just wanted to say a big thank you. I'm very grateful that you took the time to spend an hour on this episode. For me personally, I think your messages about being vulnerable and being your authentic self in whatever context you're in, whether it's a social context or a professional context, is really important. And for me personally, that's something that I definitely got out of this episode. So again, a very big thank you, Muskan. And grateful for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for having me, Sid.